Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I truly hope you are all doing well out there, no matter where you are listening from, no matter what time of day or night it might be for you. Thank you for joining me again. What you are about to hear are stories. They come from people just like you and me. They are first-hand accounts of events that have no easy answers, no clean explanations. I am not here to convince you of anything. I am not pushing any conclusions. My role is simply to provide a safe place for people to share these experiences and for us to listen. I am just the narrator. If you have had an experience of your own that you would like to share, my email address is in the description of this video down below. I read every single story that is sent to me, and I am always grateful to those who choose to trust me with their account. So with that said, let's get into it. Find a comfortable spot, turn down the lights, and let's begin. The first story tonight comes from a man who spent most of his life exploring the deep woods of the Blue Ridge Mountains. He writes that what happened to him out there took away the one place he ever truly felt at home. He just wants people to know that there are things in those mountains that the guidebooks will never mention. He asks that I not use his real name. I was born and raised in western North Carolina. The mountains were not just my backyard. They were a part of me. My dad started taking me hiking and camping when I was 5 years old. By the time I was a teenager, I knew the trails and game paths in a 50-mile radius of my home better than I knew the streets of the town I lived in. I was never scared of the woods. I respected them. I knew about bears. I knew about copperheads and timber rattlers. I knew how quickly the weather could turn. I was competent. I was comfortable. In my mid-20s, I started doing multi-day solo hikes. It was my way of resetting my mind, getting away from work, from noise, from everything. Just me, my pack, and the mountains. I had a route I favored. It was a tough one, a 40-mile loop that took you deep into a national forest. Far from any roads or casual hikers. You had to cross a few creeks, gain a lot of elevation. It was the kind of place where you could go for 3 days and not see another soul. That was the point. The trip started like any other. It was early October. The air was crisp, and the leaves were just starting to turn. Perfect hiking weather. I parked my truck at the trailhead, signed the register, and set off. The first day was beautiful, uneventful. I made good time, covering about 12 miles before I found a nice spot near a stream to make camp for the night. I cooked my dinner, sat by the fire for a bit, and listened to the sounds of the forest. The owls, the insects, the gentle rustle of the wind in the trees. It was peaceful. It was home. I slept soundly and woke up with the sun. I made coffee, broke down my camp, and was back on the trail by 8 in the morning. The second day was when things started to feel off. It began around midday. I was on a long, ascending part of the trail, working my way up a ridge. It was strenuous, and I was focused on my footing and my breathing. Then I realized something. It was quiet. Too quiet. When you spend enough time in the woods, you get used to the constant background noise. Birds chirping, squirrels chattering and rustling in the leaves, insects buzzing. It's a symphony. But all of that was gone. It was a dead, oppressive silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like it's pressing in on you from all sides. Even the wind seemed to have died down. I stopped walking and stood perfectly still, listening. Nothing, not a single bird call, not a leaf rustled by a chipmunk. My first thought was a predator, a bear or maybe a bobcat nearby. That can sometimes make the woods go quiet for a moment, but this felt different. This silence stretched on, minute after minute. A feeling of unease started to creep into the back of my mind. The feeling of being watched. I've felt it before, usually right before I spot a deer that's been standing motionless, watching me pass. But this was more intense. It was a prickly, unnerving sensation on the back of my neck. I scanned the trees around me. The woods were thick with oaks and hickories, the underbrush dense in places. I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I decided to keep moving. Maybe I was just getting spooked for no reason. I picked up my pace a little, wanting to get to the top of the ridge. The silence persisted. The only sound was the crunch of my own boots on the dry leaves. It felt unnaturally loud. Then came the smell. It was faint at first, carried on a slight breeze that had just kicked up. It was foul. My first thought was a dead animal, a deer that had died somewhere off the trail. But as I walked on, the smell got stronger, and it wasn't quite the smell of decay. It was more like a combination of things. Wet dog, but 100 times stronger. A musky, greasy smell. Underneath that was something else. Something metallic and coppery like old blood. And something that reminded me of a swamp. A stagnant, marshy odor. It was a smell that didn't belong up here, in these dry mountain woods. It was disgusting. It made the hairs on my arms stand up. I pulled my shirt up over my nose and kept walking, faster now. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I felt like whatever was making that smell was close, and it was aware of me. I kept glancing over my shoulder, into the woods off the trail. I saw nothing, just trees and shadows, but the feeling was undeniable. I reached the crest of the ridge and started my descent down the other side. As I moved down, the smell gradually faded and the sounds of the forest slowly began to return. A few birds started to sing. A squirrel chattered angrily from a branch above me. It was like the world was coming back to life. The relief I felt was immense. I told myself it was probably a black bear with mange or some kind of sickness, which could explain the weird smell. I convinced myself that the silence and the feeling of being watched was just my mind playing tricks on me, spooked by the unusual scent. I tried to put it out of my head. I hiked for another few hours, and the afternoon began to fade. I needed to find a place to make camp for my second night. I found a good spot, a small flat clearing about 30 yards from a fast-moving creek. It was a place I'd camped before. It felt safe, familiar. I set up my tent, unrolled my sleeping bag, and started gathering firewood. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the trees. The temperature was dropping quickly. I got a small fire going and started to cook my dinner. The events of the afternoon seemed far away. The woods sounded normal again. The creek bubbled nearby. An owl hooted in the distance. I started to relax. That was my mistake. I finished eating and was cleaning my pot in the creek. The fire was crackling behind me, casting a warm, flickering light on my campsite. I was crouched down by the water's edge. That's when I heard it. It came from the other side of the creek. A single heavy snap. The sound of a thick branch breaking under immense weight. I froze instantly. Every muscle in my body went tight. It wasn't a deer. I've heard hundreds of deer move through the woods. They are surprisingly light on their feet. This was heavy. Bear was my first thought. A big one. I slowly stood up, my heart starting to pound in my chest. I looked across the creek, trying to pierce the darkness. The other side was a wall of black. The trees were thick, and the firelight didn't reach that far. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, listening. Silence. Then I heard a footstep, a heavy, deliberate step in the dry leaves on the far bank, and then another. It was moving slowly, and it was walking on 2 feet. The sound was unmistakable. Thump. Pause. Thump. It wasn't the 4-footed shuffle of a bear. It was a bipedal gait, a cold dread unlike anything I had ever felt, washed over me. My mind was racing, trying to find a rational explanation. Another hiker, out here at this time of night, with no headlamp? It made no sense. I backed away from the creek, slowly moving toward my campfire. I reached into my pack and pulled out my headlamp. I fumbled with it, my hands shaking. I switched it on and aimed the beam across the water. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the trees and bushes on the other side. I swept the light back and forth. Nothing. I held the beam steady, trying to find whatever had made the noise. And then I saw it. It wasn't immediately clear what I was looking at. At first, it was just a shape, a patch of darkness that was darker than the other shadows. It was standing partially behind a large poplar tree. It was tall, impossibly tall. I kept the light on it, my heart hammering against my ribs. The shape moved. It took a step out from behind the tree into the full beam of my headlamp, and my world fell apart. It was not a bear. It was not a man. It was standing on 2 long, powerfully built legs that were bent backwards at the knee, like a dog's. It was covered in thick, coarse-looking fur that was the color of charcoal. It was huge. Its shoulders were incredibly broad, at least twice as wide as a man's. Its arms were long, too long for its body, and they ended in what looked like massive clawed hands. But it was the head that broke my mind. It was the head of a wolf, or a German shepherd. A long snout, filled with teeth that I could see even from across the creek. Pointed ears stood erect on top of its head, swiveling slightly to catch the sounds of the woods. And its eyes, they caught the light from my headlamp and glowed with a sickening, yellowish-green luminescence. They were not the eyes of an animal. They were intelligent. They were looking right at me, assessing me. We stood there locked in this tableau for a few seconds that stretched into infinity. Me, frozen on my side of the creek. This thing on the other. It tilted its head slightly as if curious. It was easily 7, maybe 8 feet tall. The sheer muscle mass on it was terrifying. It was a predator, built for power and speed. I was completely and utterly helpless. My mind finally kicked back into gear. I carried a pistol when I was in the deep woods, a .44 Magnum. It was in my tent, in a side pocket of my backpack. I needed to get to it. I started to back away very slowly, 1 step at a time. I didn't take my eyes off the creature. I didn't take my light off it. Its eyes followed my every movement. As I moved, it moved. It took a step toward the creek. Then another. It moved with a fluid, predatory grace that was horrifying to watch. It reached the edge of the water. It didn't even hesitate. It stepped right into the creek. The water was maybe 2 feet deep, but it only came up to its mid-calf. It started walking across the creek toward me. A low sound rumbled from its chest. A growl. But it was deeper and more resonant than any animal growl I had ever heard. It was a sound you felt in your bones. A sound that communicated pure menace. That's when the panic set in. The pure animal terror of being hunted. I abandoned every rational thought of getting my gun. I abandoned my tent, my pack, my fire. I ran blindly into the dark woods, away from the creek, away from the light of my own fire. I could hear it behind me. I heard the splash as it surged out of the creek. I heard the crash as it hit the bank on my side, and then I heard it coming after me. The sound was the most terrifying thing I have ever experienced. The sound of something that large, that powerful, moving through the woods at speed. It was crashing through the underbrush, snapping branches like they were twigs. I could hear its heavy footfalls pounding the earth, closing the distance between us. I could hear it breathing, harsh, guttural breaths. I ran harder than I've ever run in my life. Adrenaline was coursing through me. I wasn't thinking, I was just reacting. Primal survival instinct took over. I dodged trees, jumped over fallen logs, my headlamp beam bouncing wildly in front of me, illuminating fleeting glimpses of the forest floor. I didn't dare look back. I knew it was right behind me. I could feel its presence. The woods were a black maze. I had no idea where I was going. I was just running uphill, trying to put as much distance as possible between me and that thing. My lungs were on fire. My legs were screaming. I risked a glance over my shoulder. I saw the glowing yellow-green eyes bobbing in the darkness. They were closer than I thought. Much closer. A wave of pure terror gave me a new burst of speed. I stumbled on a root and went down hard. My headlamp flying off my head and skittering into the leaves, its beam pointing uselessly at the sky. I was plunged into almost total darkness. I scrambled to my feet, disoriented. I could hear it close now. I could hear it sniffing the air. I was a dead man. I looked around wildly. The faint light from my discarded headlamp illuminated a rock formation just a few feet away, a jumble of large boulders with a dark crevice underneath one of them. Without thinking, I dove for it. I squeezed myself into the narrow opening, scraping my back and shoulders on the rough stone. It was a tight fit. I pulled my legs in and curled into the tightest ball I could manage. My heart was beating so loud I was sure it could hear it. I held my breath and listened. I heard it approach my hiding spot. I heard the heavy footsteps stop right outside the crevice. I could hear it sniffing, loud and wet. I could smell it. That same foul, greasy, wet dog smell filled the small space I was in. It was so strong it made me want to gag. I pressed my face into the dirt, trying not to make a sound. Tears were streaming down my face. I was going to die here, in this dark hole in the ground. Then I heard a claw scrape against the rock right above my head. Scrape, scrape. It knew I was in here. It was trying to figure out how to get to me. A low, frustrated growl echoed in the small space. I squeezed my eyes shut and prayed. I'm not a religious man, but I prayed that night. I prayed for it to go away. It circled the rock formation. I could hear its weight shifting the leaves and dirt outside. It stayed there for what felt like hours, sniffing, pacing, occasionally letting out a low growl or a huff. It was toying with me, or waiting for me to make a mistake. I stayed absolutely still. I didn't move a muscle. I controlled my breathing, taking shallow, silent breaths. The night stretched on into an eternity of terror. Every sound from outside was magnified. Every rustle of a leaf, every snap of a twig sent a fresh jolt of fear through me. Eventually, the sounds became less frequent. I heard it move away from the rocks. I heard its footsteps receding into the woods. But I didn't trust it. I stayed in that crevice, cramped and terrified, for the rest of the night. I did not sleep. I just waited for the sun to come up. The first faint gray light of dawn finally started to filter through the trees. It was the most beautiful sight I have ever seen. I waited until the sun was fully up before I dared to move. My body was stiff and sore. I was covered in dirt and scrapes. I cautiously crawled out of the crevice. I stood up and looked around. The woods were empty. It was quiet, but it was a normal morning quiet. Birds were starting to sing. I found my headlamp, its battery dead. I looked at the ground around the rocks. There were tracks, large, canine-like tracks, but they were distorted. They looked like a wolf track, but with a longer heel pad, pressed deep into the earth. They were huge, bigger than any bear track I'd ever seen. I knew I had to get out of there. I didn't go back to my campsite. I knew better. I left my tent, my pack, everything. All I had were the clothes on my back and a small knife on my belt. I used the sun and my knowledge of the terrain to orient myself and started the long walk back to my truck. It was over 10 miles. Every step was agony, not just because I was exhausted and sore, but because I was terrified. Every shadow looked like a monster. Every sound made me jump. I felt hunted. I walked for hours, pushing myself, not stopping to rest. I finally reached the trailhead in the late afternoon. Seeing my truck was like seeing a spaceship that could take me away from this nightmare. I have never been so happy to see a vehicle in my life. I got in, locked the doors, and just sat there for a few minutes shaking. Then I started the engine and drove. I didn't look back. The drive home was a blur. When I got to my house, I went inside, locked the door, and went straight to the shower. I stood under the hot water for a long time, trying to wash the smell and the feeling of the woods off of me. It didn't work. That night, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing yellow-green eyes. I saw that long canine snout. I heard that growl. And the next day, I called the park rangers. I didn't tell them the truth. I couldn't. Who would believe me? I just told them I had a run-in with a very large and aggressive black bear, and that I had to abandon my gear. I gave them the location of my campsite. The ranger on the phone sounded bored. He told me they'd go look for it when they had a chance, and that I shouldn't have left my gear out. I never heard from them again. A week later, I tried to tell my brother. He's an avid hunter and outdoorsman just like me. I thought if anyone would understand, it would be him. I sat him down and told him everything exactly as it happened. When I was done, he just stared at me. He told me I must have been exhausted, that I probably saw a bear and my mind, tired and in the dark, filled in the blanks and turned it into a monster. He said I let my imagination run away with me. He wasn't being mean. He was trying to be rational. But his dismissal hurt more than I can describe. It made me feel completely alone. I never talked about it with him or anyone else again. That experience changed me. I sold all of my camping and hiking gear. I haven't been on a trail since. The place that was once my sanctuary is now the source of my deepest fears. I can't even watch nature documentaries without feeling a pang of anxiety. I live in a town now, not out in the country. I make sure my doors and windows are always locked. I have blackout curtains on all my windows. I hate the dark. I know what I saw that night. I am a sane, rational person. I was not hallucinating. I was not dreaming. What I saw was real. It was a living, breathing creature. It was intelligent, it was powerful, and it was malevolent. I don't know what it is or what to call it. I've since gone online and found other stories about something people call the Dogman. Some of the descriptions match what I saw. It gives me some small comfort to know that I'm not the only one, but it's a cold comfort. I'm sharing this story because people need to be careful. The world is not as safe and understood as we like to think. There are still dark places on the map. There are things living in those places that we have no explanation for. If you're ever out in the woods and it suddenly goes dead silent, trust that feeling in your gut. Don't try to rationalize it. Just turn around and leave. Don't make the same mistake I did. The next account comes from a man in Kentucky. He and his cousin were just teenagers when this happened. He says that for a long time he thought he was crazy because the only other person who saw it refused to ever speak of it again. This happened back in the late 90s. I was 16 and my cousin Mark was 17. We were best friends, more like brothers really. We lived about 10 miles apart out in the country. His house was on the other side of a big ridge from mine. There were two ways to get between our houses. You could take the main paved highway, which looped all the way around the ridge, a drive that took about 30 minutes. Or you could take the old gravel service road that cut straight over it. The service road was rough. It was full of potholes and washouts, but it cut the travel time down to about 10 minutes. So naturally, that's the way we always went. Mark had just gotten his first truck, an old beat-up Ford Ranger. He was incredibly proud of it. We spent half that summer driving around in it, going nowhere in particular, just enjoying the freedom. One night in August, I was over at his place. We were just hanging out in his basement, playing video games. Around 11 o'clock, my mom called and told me it was time to come home. So Mark grabbed his keys and we hopped in his truck to drive me back to my house. It was a typical summer night, hot and humid. The windows were down and we had the radio turned up loud. We turned off the main road onto the gravel service road. The road was narrow with thick woods pressing in on both sides. His headlights cut a tunnel through the darkness. We were about halfway over the ridge, on the most isolated stretch of the road. There were no houses out here, just trees and darkness. We were laughing about something, not really paying attention. That's when something darted across the road, way up ahead in the reach of the headlights. It was fast, just a quick dark shape. "Whoa, see that?" Mark said, slowing down a little. "Yeah, just a deer," I said. It was a common sight. We kept driving. A few hundred yards later, we saw it again. This time it was closer, and it wasn't a deer. It ran across the road from right to left, and it was on two legs. It was hunched over, moving in a weird, loping gait, but it was definitely on two legs. "What the heck was that?" I asked. Mark didn't say anything. He just slowed the truck down to a crawl. We were both peering into the darkness ahead, trying to see what it was. My first thought was it was a person. Maybe someone's car had broken down. But that didn't make any sense. The way it moved was all wrong. It was too fast, too fluid. And it was dark. It looked like it was covered in dark fur or hair. We rounded a slight bend in the road, and there it was. It was standing on the left side of the road, right at the edge of the tree line. It was half turned toward us as if we had just caught its attention. Mark slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded to a stop in the loose gravel, maybe 50 feet away from it. The headlights lit it up perfectly. The sight is burned into my memory. It was tall, easily over 7 feet. It was covered in dark, matted-looking fur like a dog that had been rolling in the mud. Its body was muscular but lean. It had the powerful legs of a canine. Bent in that same backward way, its arms were long and sinewy. But the head was the worst part. It had the head and snout of a huge dog, a wolf or a shepherd. Its ears were pointed and stood straight up. Its mouth was slightly open, and we could see a row of large, yellow teeth. It was just standing there, staring at us. The radio was still playing, but neither of us heard it. The world had gone silent. All I could hear was the blood pounding in my ears. I couldn't process what I was seeing. It was impossible. It was a monster from a nightmare, standing right there in the headlights of my cousin's truck. Mark and I were both frozen. We just sat there staring, our mouths hanging open. Then the creature moved. It turned its head fully toward us. It locked its eyes onto the truck. And in the glare of the headlights, its eyes seemed to glow with a faint amber light. There was a terrifying intelligence in that gaze. It wasn't just an animal looking at us. It felt like it was looking into us. It took a step toward the road. A slow, deliberate step. That's what broke the spell. "Go," I whispered. My voice was hoarse. Mark didn't respond. He was like a statue. "Mark, go," I yelled, grabbing his arm. The creature took another step, lowering its head and hunching its shoulders like a predator about to charge. Mark finally snapped out of it. He slammed his foot on the gas pedal. The engine roared, and the back tires spun in the gravel, kicking up a cloud of dust. The truck lurched forward. We sped toward the creature. We had to pass right by it to get down the road. As we drew level with it, it lunged. It moved with unbelievable speed. 1 second, it was on the side of the road. The next, it was right beside my passenger window. I screamed and threw myself against Mark. There was a loud, violent thump against the side of the truck. It felt like we had hit a brick wall. Then came a horrible scraping sound, the sound of metal on metal or claws on metal. Then it was gone. Mark didn't slow down. He kept the pedal floored. The old truck rattled and bounced over the rough road. I looked back through the rear window, but all I could see was the dust cloud we were leaving behind. We didn't say a word to each other for the rest of the drive. We were both breathing hard in a state of shock. Mark drove straight to my house, flying down the gravel road way too fast. He pulled into my driveway and killed the engine. The porch light was on. The house looked like the safest place in the entire world. We sat in the truck for a minute in silence. Did you see that?" I finally managed to say. Mark just nodded, his face pale. He was staring straight ahead, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white. We both got out of the truck, our legs shaky. We walked around to the passenger side, and we saw the damage. There was a large dent in the passenger door right below the window. And starting from that dent, there were 3 long, deep gouges scraped into the paint, running halfway down the length of the door. The scratches were deep. They had gone right through the paint and primer, down to the bare metal. They were perfectly parallel. The marks of 3 enormous claws. Seeing that physical evidence made it all real. We hadn't imagined it. My dad came out onto the porch then, asking what all the noise was about. He saw the look on our faces, saw the damage to the truck. What happened? Did you boys hit a deer? He asked. We didn't know what to say. How could we explain what we saw? Mark just mumbled something about swerving to miss a deer and hitting a tree branch. It was a weak lie, and I don't think my dad bought it. But he didn't press us. He just told us to be more careful. Mark didn't stay. He got back in his truck and drove home, taking the long way around on the paved highway. I went inside, but I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the image of that thing in the headlights over and over in my mind. The next day I called Mark. I wanted to talk about it, to try and make sense of what we had seen. But he shut me down. We saw a bear, he said, his voice flat. That's all it was, a big bear. And the scratches came from a branch. Mark, that was not a bear, I said. You know it wasn't. It had a dog's head. It was standing on 2 legs. Don't talk about it, he snapped. I don't want to talk about it. We saw a bear. End of story. And that was it. He refused to ever speak of it again. If I ever tried to bring it up, he would get angry and change the subject. He had the truck repaired. He told everyone he hit a guardrail. Something changed between us after that night. Our friendship was never the same. It was like there was this huge unspoken thing sitting between us. He dealt with it by denying it completely. I couldn't do that. I knew what I saw. His denial made me feel like I was going crazy. It was an incredibly isolating experience. The one person who could have validated what I saw chose to pretend it never happened. We drifted apart after that summer. We still saw each other at family gatherings, but it was always awkward. We were never close again. I never drove down that gravel road at night again. To this day, if I have to drive on a lonely country road after dark, I get a knot in my stomach. I find myself scanning the tree lines, watching for movement. The fear from that night never really went away. It just buried itself deep inside me. I don't know what that thing was, but it was real. It was strong enough to dent a steel truck door and tear through it with its claws, and it was smart enough to terrify 2 teenage boys into a lifetime of silence and doubt. Sometimes the scariest part of an encounter like this isn't just what you see. It's the aftermath. It's the way it can change you and the way it can sever the connections you have with people you trust. It leaves you alone with a terrible secret. Our last story this evening comes from a man who didn't need to go deep into the woods to have his encounter. It happened on his own property, a place he had lived his whole life. He says the worst feeling in the world is not feeling safe in your own home. I live on a piece of land in Ohio that's been in my family for 3 generations. It's about 40 acres, mostly woods, with about 10 acres cleared for the house, a barn, and a few fields. For years, my grandfather grew corn in one of those fields. It sits right behind the house, separated from the backyard by just a narrow strip of grass. After he passed, I took over the property. I kept things much the same. I leased the field to a local farmer who continued to grow corn on it. I've lived here my whole life. I know every sound, every smell. I'm used to the wildlife: deer, coyotes, raccoons, opossums. They're all just part of the background noise of living out here. This happened a few years ago in late August. The corn was at its peak. It was tall and dense, over 8 feet high in most places. It formed a solid green wall at the edge of my backyard. It was a hot evening, and I was sitting on my back porch, just having a beer and enjoying the sunset. My dog, a big German shepherd named Buster, was with me. Buster was a good dog. He was fearless. He'd chase off coyotes and wasn't afraid of anything. That's why his behavior was the first thing that set me on edge. He was lying at my feet, and all of a sudden he sat bolt upright. His ears were perked, and he was staring intently at the cornfield. The fur on his back, along his spine, stood up on an end. He let out a low, soft whine from deep in his throat. It was a sound of fear. I'd never heard him make a sound like that before. "What is it, boy?" I said, reaching down to pet him. He ignored me. His entire focus was locked on the edge of the corn. I looked out at the field. I couldn't see anything. The sun had just set, and the light was fading fast. The field was turning into a dark, impenetrable mass. Then I heard a sound. It was a rustling in the corn stalks. It wasn't the sound of the wind. The air was dead still. This was a heavy, rhythmic rustling, like something large was walking through the rows, pushing the stalks aside as it went. Swish, swish, swish. My first thought was deer. They often bedded down in the corn. But the sound was too loud, too heavy for a deer. And it was moving parallel to the edge of the field, not deeper into it or out of it. Buster started to growl, a low, menacing rumble. He backed up until he was pressed against my legs, still staring at the field. He was genuinely terrified of whatever was in there. That was enough to make me take it seriously. I stood up and went inside, letting the screen door slam shut behind me. Buster scrambled in with me. I grabbed a powerful flashlight I keep by the back door. It's one of those big, heavy ones that can throw a beam a few 100 yards. I went back to the door and opened it just enough to peer out. I could still hear the rustling. It seemed to have stopped in one place, directly behind my house, maybe 20 yards into the corn. I flicked on the flashlight and aimed the beam at the spot where I heard the sound. The bright white light cut through the twilight. It lit up the outer rows of corn stalks. I swept the beam back and forth slowly, and then I saw them. 2 eyes reflecting the light back at me. My blood ran cold. The eyes were too high. Way too high off the ground to be a deer or a coyote. They were even too high to be a person standing on the ground. They were glowing with a reddish-orange color. I held the beam steady on the eyes. My hand was starting to tremble. For a moment, nothing happened. It was a standoff. Me on my porch, and those eyes in the corn. Then the thing they were attached to stood up. I saw a shape rise up above the tops of the corn stalks. The corn was over 8 feet tall. This thing was taller. It was just a silhouette against the dark purple sky. But the shape was unmistakable. I could see a head and a pair of broad, massive shoulders. The head was not human. It had a long snout. And on top of the head, I could clearly see 2 pointed, triangular ears. It was the profile of a gigantic wolf or dog. It just stood there, its head and shoulders visible above the corn, looking directly at my house, looking directly at me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. My mind was short-circuiting. This couldn't be real. It was like something out of a horror movie. Buster was going insane inside the house behind me. He was barking frantically, throwing himself against the door. The creature in the field must have heard him. It let out a sound. It wasn't a growl or a bark. It was a deep, guttural huffing sound. A cough. It was a sound of annoyance or a warning. It didn't move any closer. It didn't retreat. It just stood there, watching me. I felt like a bug under a microscope. I felt like it was sizing me up, sizing up my house. The feeling of being prey was overwhelming. I finally found the strength to move. I slowly, carefully backed away from the door, never taking my eyes or the flashlight beam off of the shape in the corn. I reached behind me and slid the glass door shut. I fumbled for the lock and clicked it into place. I backed away from the door into the center of my kitchen. I turned off the flashlight. I didn't want it to see me inside. I stood there in the dark, my heart racing, listening. Buster had gone quiet. He was standing by the door, whining softly. I went to the front of the house and made sure the front door was locked and the deadbolt was thrown. I checked all the windows on the ground floor. Then I went and got my shotgun out of its case. I loaded it. I spent the rest of the night sitting in a chair in my living room in the dark with the shotgun across my lap. I was too scared to go to bed. I just sat there, listening. For hours I heard nothing but the normal night sounds. Then around 2 a.m, I heard something else. It was a soft scratching sound. It was coming from the back of the house. It sounded like something was dragging its claws along the wood siding of the house. My whole body went rigid. Buster heard it too. He started growling again. The scratching went on for about a minute, moving along the wall. Then it stopped. I sat there wide awake until the sun came up. I have never been so relieved to see the daylight in my life. As soon as it was fully light, I went outside. I took the shotgun with me. Buster stayed on the porch, refusing to go any further. I walked cautiously around to the back of the house. I looked at the siding where I'd heard the scratching. There were marks on the wood, long, thin scratches, as if someone had taken a nail and dragged it across the paint. Then I walked over to the edge of the cornfield. In the soft dirt at the edge of the field, there were tracks. They were huge. They were shaped like the paw print of a massive dog, but there was a distinct heel pad like a human foot. The stride between them was enormous. I followed them for a little ways along the edge of the field. Then they turned and went back into the corn, and I lost them. I stood there for a long time, just looking at those tracks. Proof. I wasn't crazy. It was real. That thing was real, and it had been standing in my backyard, watching my house. It had walked up to my house and touched it. The feeling of safety I had always felt here, on my own land, was gone. It vanished in an instant. I've lived here for a few more years since that night, but it's different now. I installed motion-activated floodlights all around the house. I never go out after dark without a powerful flashlight and a sidearm. Buster is never allowed out by himself after sunset. I am constantly vigilant. I watch the cornfield. Even when the corn is harvested and the field is just bare dirt, I watch it. I've never seen it again. but I know it's out there. I don't think it wanted to hurt me that night. I think it was just curious. Or maybe it was just passing through and my house was in its way. But that doesn't make it any less terrifying. The most frightening part was not the chase or the confrontation. It was the quiet, intelligent observation. The feeling of being watched by something ancient and powerful that does not care about you or your sense of security. It taught me that the circle of light from your porch lamp is a very small thing, and you never ever know what might be standing just beyond it in the dark, watching you go about your life. Thank you to everyone who took the time to listen tonight, and a genuine heartfelt thank you to the people who trusted me with their experiences. To share something so personal takes a lot of courage, and I am always honored that you choose this channel as the place to do it. If these stories resonated with you, please consider hitting the like button. It helps the channel more than you know. And if you know someone else who might appreciate these accounts, feel free to share the video with them. If you're new here and you made it this far, I hope you'll consider subscribing for more stories in the future. I read the comments on every video. The community we have here is amazing. The conversation are respectful and thoughtful, and I appreciate that so much. Thank you for making this a great place to discuss these difficult topics. That's all for me tonight. Until we meet again, please take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Watch over your loved ones, and always, always keep your head on a swivel. Stay safe out there. Good night. I was 27 when my life broke in two. Before that night and after that night, there's no other way to put it. The person I am now was born in the dark, at the edge of a tree line in the space of a single, terrified heartbeat. Before that, I was just a guy living on a piece of land that had been in my family for 3 generations. A guy who thought he knew the woods. That's the part that sticks with me the most. The arrogance of it. I thought I knew things. I'd grown up in the Ozarks, on that very property. My dad had taught me how to read the forest the way other kids learn to read books. I knew the difference between the track of a white-tailed deer and a wild hog. I could tell a coyote's howl from a feral dog's bark. I knew the sound a black bear makes when it's bluff charging, a deep huffing sound that vibrates in your chest. I knew the smell of rot, the smell of pine, the smell of rain coming on the wind. The woods were my backyard. They were predictable. They were safe, as long as you were smart. That was a mistake. The property was about 80 acres, mostly vertical. Steep hills covered in oak, hickory, and pine, dropping down into a deep hollow where a spring-fed creek ran year-round. Our house, a small, simple one-story my grandfather built, sat on a flattened-out section near the county road. Next to it was a big metal workshop where I spent most of my days fixing engines and welding things that were broken. It was a good life, a quiet life. The driveway was a 1/4 mile of gravel and dirt that wound up from the road. At night, with the house and workshop lights off, the darkness was absolute. the kind of black that felt like a physical weight. But it was a comfortable darkness. I had lived in it my whole life. I had no reason to be afraid of it. That evening started like any other in late August. The air was thick and heavy with humidity, the kind that makes your shirt stick to your back the second you step outside. The sun had just dipped below the western ridge, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. The cicadas were buzzing their deafening, hypnotic song, a sound so constant, it was just part of the silence. I'd finished up in the shop, washing grease from my hands at the utility sink. I was tired. A long day of wrestling with a stubborn tractor engine had left my muscles aching. My usual routine was to grab a cold drink, sit on the back porch, and watch the fireflies start to flicker in the yard as dusk settled in. But that night, for no particular reason, I felt restless. I wanted to move. I decided to take a walk. There was a trail I'd worn into the earth over the years. It started behind the workshop, went past an old burn pile, and then cut down into the woods. It followed the spine of a ridge for a few hundred yards before dropping sharply toward the creek. It was my favorite walk. The air was always cooler down by the water, and the sound of it running over the rocks was calming. I didn't take a flashlight. I wouldn't need one for a while yet, and I knew the path by heart. I could have walked it blindfolded. I didn't take a gun either. Just the small fixed blade knife I always had on my belt. It was more a tool than a weapon. I had never, not once, felt the need for a weapon on my own land. I stepped off the porch and into the tall grass of the yard. The air was full of the smell of cut hay from the neighbor's field and the sweet scent of honeysuckle growing along the fence line. Everything was normal. Everything was exactly as it should be. I walked past the workshop, its metal siding creaking softly as it cooled in the evening air. The security light mounted on the corner wasn't on yet. It was set to a timer, to click on when the darkness became complete. I reached the tree line and stepped onto the trail. The temperature dropped a few degrees instantly as I moved under the canopy of the trees. The light here was dimmer, filtered through the thick leaves overhead. The sounds of the open yard faded, replaced by the intimate rustles and chirps of the forest. A squirrel chittered angrily from a high branch. A crow called out once, a sharp, lonely sound. Normal, all of it. The path was narrow, the dirt packed hard from countless trips. I walked at a slow, easy pace, just letting my mind wander, thinking about the tractor engine, about what I needed to pick up in town the next day. The usual mundane thoughts of a life built on routine. I was about halfway down the ridge, maybe a 10-minute walk from the house. I could just start to hear the faint sound of the creek below. I remember stopping for a moment to look at a patch of mushrooms growing on a fallen log, their white caps almost glowing in the dim light. And then it happened. The sound just stopped. It wasn't a gradual fading. It was instantaneous. 1 second the air was vibrating with the chorus of cicadas and crickets. The next, there was a profound ringing silence. It was so sudden and so complete that it felt like I'd gone deaf. I stood perfectly still. The only sound was the blood rushing in my ears. Every instinct I had, every lesson my dad had ever taught me, screamed at me. This was wrong. This was a predator silence. When the small things go quiet, it's because something big and dangerous is moving nearby. My first thought was a bobcat, or maybe a black bear. We had plenty of both. A bear would make the woods go quiet. I slowly scanned the trees around me, my eyes trying to pierce the gathering gloom. The forest floor was a chaotic mess of shadows and low brush. Anything could be hiding in it. I listened. I held my breath and just listened. Nothing. Not a leaf rustle. Not a bird. The silence was a presence in itself. It felt heavy, unnatural. I've been in the woods my whole life, and I had never experienced a quiet this deep, this absolute. It felt like the woods itself was holding its breath. My hand went to the handle of the knife on my belt. The smooth leather felt cool and familiar, but it offered no comfort. It felt like a toothpick. My heart started to beat a little faster. The calm of my walk was gone, replaced by a low, humming anxiety. My brain was racing, trying to identify the threat. Bear. It had to be a bear. Maybe a mother with cubs. That was the most dangerous thing I was likely to encounter. I decided the best thing to do was back away slowly. Make my presence known without being aggressive. I was about to call out, to say, "Hey, bear," like you're supposed to. But then the smell hit me. It rolled in on the still air, a thick, nauseating wave. It wasn't the earthy scent of a bear. It wasn't the smell of a dead animal, which is a uniquely foul smell I know all too well. This was something else entirely. It was rank, musky, like a pile of wet, rotting leaves, mixed with something greasy and animal. But underneath that was a sharper, more chemical odor, a coppery, metallic scent, like old blood. And woven through it all was the unmistakable, overpowering stench of a wet dog. Not just a wet dog, but a sick one. A dog that had been rolling in garbage and death for a week. The smell was so strong it made my eyes water. It coated the inside of my mouth. I had to fight the urge to gag. And my carefully constructed theory of a black bear evaporated. A bear doesn't smell like that. Nothing I'd ever encountered in these woods smelled like that. The feeling of being watched intensified. It was no longer a vague unease. It was a tangible pressure at the back of my neck. I felt like I was in the crosshairs of a rifle. I knew with a certainty that went deeper than thought that something was looking at me, and it was close. The silence, the smell, the feeling of being watched, they all combined into a single terrifying message. You are in danger. You need to leave. Now. My mind was a frantic scramble of failed rationalizations. A pack of coyotes? No, they make noise and they don't smell this foul. Wild hogs? No, they crash through the brush. You can hear them from a mile away. A trespasser? A person? No, just no. The feeling was too primal. This wasn't human. I took a single, slow step backward, my boots making a soft, crunching sound on the dry leaves. The sound was deafening in the crushing silence. That's when I heard it. Snap. It was the sharp, percussive sound of a thick branch breaking under weight. It came from my right, further up the ridge, maybe 30 or 40 yards away. It was a heavy sound, much heavier than a deer, heavier than a man. I froze mid-step. My head snapped in the direction of the sound. My blood ran cold. The sun was almost completely gone now. The world was painted in shades of gray and deep indigo. I was looking into a thick stand of old-growth oaks. Their massive trunks were just dark columns against a slightly less dark background. I strained my eyes, searching for movement, for a shape that didn't belong. For a long moment, I saw nothing. just trees and shadows. I started to think maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe it was just a dead branch falling from a tree. Then I saw it. It was so subtle at first that I almost missed it. A patch of darkness that was just darker than the other shadows. It was next to one of the biggest oaks on the ridge, a tree I knew well, a monster of a tree, easily 4 feet thick at its base. The dark shape was pressed up against the side of the trunk, almost blending in. But it wasn't part of the tree. It had a different texture, a different outline, and it was tall. My brain tried to make it a bear. It's a bear standing on its hind legs, it told me. That's all it is. But the shape was wrong. It was too slender. A standing bear is pear-shaped, wide at the bottom. This was broad at the shoulders with a distinct torso and a head. It moved. It took one step away from the tree into a small clearing where the last vestiges of twilight could reach. And my ability to reason, to rationalize, just shattered. What I was looking at was impossible. It was a nightmare given flesh and bone. It was standing on 2 legs, not like a bear stands, awkwardly and temporarily. It stood with a natural balanced posture, but the legs were wrong. They weren't straight like a human's. They had a backward bend at the knee, a distinct hock joint like a dog or a deer. They were thick with muscle, covered in shaggy dark fur. It was huge. The top of its head had to be 7.5, maybe 8 feet from the ground. Its shoulders were incredibly broad, wider than any man I'd ever seen. The body was lean but powerful, a corded knot of muscle, visible even beneath the dark, matted fur. Its arms were long, disturbingly long. They hung down past its bent knees, ending in what looked like massive hands with thick, dark fingers. I couldn't see them clearly, but I had the distinct impression of claws. But the head, that was the thing that broke my mind. It wasn't a bear's head. It wasn't human. It was the head of a wolf, or a timber wolf, or something like it. It had a long, tapered snout, filled with what I could only assume were teeth. The fur on its head was shorter, defining the powerful jawline. And on top of its head, 2 pointed ears, like a German shepherd's, stood erect, swiveling independently of each other, tasting the air. It turned its head slowly and looked directly at me. In the deepening gloom, I saw its eyes. They caught the faint light and reflected it back, not with the green or white glint of a deer or a cat, but with a dim, reddish-orange glow, like the embers of a dying fire. And in that moment, I understood what I was looking at. I didn't have a name for it then, not really. The local stories and legends were just things you heard around a campfire, not things you saw standing in front of you. But I knew this was not an animal. Not in any way I understood. The intelligence in those glowing eyes was plain as day. It was ancient and cold and filled with a terrifying predatory calm. We were locked there for a lifetime. Me, a statue of pure terror. It, a monument of impossible biology. The silence was still absolute, as if the entire world was waiting to see what would happen next. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the quiet. My breath was caught in my throat. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. All I could do was stare. The creature tilted its head, a curiously canine gesture that was made monstrous by its upright man-like frame. A low sound rumbled in its chest. It wasn't a growl, not yet. It was deeper than that. It was a vibration that traveled through the ground, up through the soles of my boots, and into my bones. It was a sound of inquiry, of assessment. It knew I was there. It had known all along. The silence, the smell, that was all it. It had been watching me, waiting. My frozen mind finally sputtered back to life with a single primal command. Run. But I couldn't. My feet were rooted to the spot. I was mesmerized by the sheer impossibility of it. Part of my brain was still screaming that this couldn't be real. It was a trick of the light, a waking nightmare. It took another step toward me, a slow, deliberate, fluid movement. It didn't lumber like a bear. It moved with a terrifying grace, its powerful dog-like legs eating up the distance. The smell washed over me again, stronger than ever. I could taste it, a foul, coppery tang on my tongue. I started backing away. I didn't make a conscious decision to do it. My body just took over. One step, then another. My eyes were still locked on the creature. I couldn't look away. I was afraid that if I broke eye contact, it would charge. It watched me retreat, its head low, those terrible orange eyes never leaving mine. It took another step for every one of mine, maintaining the distance between us. It was toying with me. It wasn't in a hurry. It knew it was faster, stronger. It knew I had nowhere to go. Then it did something that terrified me more than anything else. It raised its snout and curled its lips back. I couldn't see the detail in the low light, but I saw the pale flash of long, yellowed fangs, and it let out a growl. It was not the sound an animal makes. It was a layered, complex sound. It started as a low rumble, the one I had felt in my bones, but it rose in pitch and volume until it was a snarling, roaring blast of sound that hit me like a physical blow. It was filled with a rage and a hatred that was chillingly intelligent. It was a sound that said, "I am going to tear you apart." That sound broke the spell. The paralysis that held me shattered, and raw animal panic took its place. I didn't think. I just reacted. I turned my back on the monster and I ran. I ran like I had never run in my life. I abandoned the trail and crashed straight through the underbrush, heading uphill toward the house. Branches whipped at my face, thorns tore at my clothes and skin. I didn't feel any of it. My world had shrunk to the burning in my lungs and the desperate need to put distance between me and that thing. I could hear it behind me. The sound was the purest definition of terror. It was the sound of immense weight and power moving through the forest with an unnatural speed. It wasn't the clumsy crashing of a bear. It was the rhythmic, pounding footfalls of something running, something that knew how to move through these woods better than I did. Branches were snapping like toothpicks. Small trees were being shouldered aside. It was gaining on me. I could hear its breathing now, a ragged, guttural panting that was terrifyingly close. The foul smell was all around me, so thick I felt like I was breathing it in instead of air. I risked a glance over my shoulder. It was a stupid movie trope thing to do, but I couldn't help it. What I saw will be burned into my memory until the day I die. The creature was no longer just running on two legs. It was moving on all fours, its long arms and powerful hind legs pumping, covering the ground in great, loping bounds. It moved like a giant, hellish ape, but with the speed of a greyhound. Its dark form was a fluid shadow flowing over and through the obstacles in its path. Those glowing red-orange eyes were fixed on me. Seeing it move like that, with such explosive predatory purpose, sent a new wave of adrenaline and terror threw me. I pushed myself harder, my legs screaming in protest, my lungs feeling like they were about to burst. The house. I just had to make it to the house. The thought was a desperate mantra in my head. I could see the edge of the tree line ahead, the point where the dark woods gave way to the open yard. It was maybe 50 yards away. It looked like 1,000,000 miles. The creature behind me let out another one of those roaring snarls, closer this time. So much closer. I could feel the vibration of it in my spine. I absolutely knew that it was right behind me. I could almost feel its hot, foul breath on my neck. I didn't dare look back again. I just pumped my arms and legs, my mind empty of everything but the need for safety. Then with a final desperate burst of speed, I broke through the last line of trees and stumbled into the clearing. At that exact moment, the security light on the corner of the workshop clicked on. The yard was suddenly bathed in a harsh yellow light. The sudden brightness was disorienting. I squinted, still running, my shadow stretching out long and distorted in front of me. I heard a sound behind me, a deep, guttural grunt of what might have been surprise or anger. I chanced another look. The creature had stopped dead just inside the tree line, at the very edge of the light's reach. It stood there, a towering black silhouette, partially obscured by the shadows of the trees. It was back on its hind legs, its form stark and terrifying against the darkness of the woods. It would not step into the light. I didn't stop to wonder why. I didn't care. I just ran. Across the damp grass of the yard, my boots pounding on the earth. The back porch was ahead of me. 3 wooden steps, a screen door, a solid oak door. Safety. I hit the steps at a full run, nearly tripping. I threw the screen door open so hard it slammed against the side of the house. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely get the key out of my pocket. It felt like my fingers were made of rubber. I fumbled with the lock. The key scraped against the metal plate. I couldn't get it in the keyhole. Behind me, from the edge of the woods, I heard that low, menacing rumble again. It was watching me, waiting. Come on, I whispered, my voice a raw, ragged thing. The key finally slid into the lock. I turned it, heard the click of the tumbler. I twisted the knob, threw my shoulder against the door, and fell inside, sprawling onto the linoleum of the kitchen floor. I scrambled back to my feet, slammed the heavy oak door shut, and threw the deadbolt. The solid chunk of the bolt sliding into the frame was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I stood there, my back pressed against the door, gasping for breath, my body trembling uncontrollably. I was covered in sweat, dirt, and bleeding from a dozen small cuts. But I was inside. I was safe. For a moment, my rational mind started to come back online, overriding the panic. One locked door might not be enough. I didn't know what that thing was capable of. I stumbled through the small house, my movements jerky and uncoordinated. I went to every window, first in the kitchen, then the living room, then the 2 bedrooms. I slammed each one shut and locked it. I pulled every curtain, every blind, plunging the house into near total darkness. I didn't want it to see me. I didn't want to see it. Then I remembered the shotgun. My dad had left his old Mossberg pump action in the back of my bedroom closet years ago. I never used it. I wasn't much of a shotgun hunter, but I was glad it was there now. I ran to the closet, pulled it out. The cold, heavy steel was a comfort in my shaking hands. There was a box of shells on the shelf. double-aught buckshot. I fumbled a shell out of the box, my fingers slick with sweat. I dropped the first one on the floor. The second one, too. On the third try, I managed to shove one into the chamber and rack the slide. The sound, that classic, unmistakable shuck-shuck, echoed in the small, dark house. It was a sound of defiance. I crept back into the living room, which had a window facing the backyard and the tree line. I crouched below the window, the shotgun held tight against my shoulder. The barrel pointed toward the back door, and I waited. The only sound was my own ragged breathing and the frantic, painful thumping of my heart. The world outside the house had gone silent again. Not the unnatural predatory silence from the woods, but a simple, empty quiet. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. I stayed crouched on the floor, my muscles cramping, my eyes wide in the dark, straining to hear anything. Every creak of the old house settling was a footstep. Every tap of a branch against the roof was a claw. I started to think maybe it was gone. Maybe the light had scared it off for good. Maybe I was safe. Then I heard it. A soft, scraping sound coming from the back porch. Scrape, scrape. It was the sound of something sharp and hard being dragged slowly across the wood of the back door. My blood turned to ice. It hadn't left. It had come out of the woods. It was on my porch. I tightened my grip on the shotgun, my knuckle white. I didn't breathe. I just listened. The scraping stopped. For a long moment there was nothing. Then a new sound. A low, wet, snuffling noise. Right at the bottom of the door. It was smelling the crack between the door and the frame. It was testing my defenses, looking for a way in. The sound was so clear, so close. It was a sound of animal curiosity, but driven by a cold, calculating intelligence. My mind reeled. This wasn't just some dumb beast. It knew I was in here. It was hunting me. Suddenly, a tremendous thud slammed against the side of the house, just to the left of the back door. The whole wall shuddered. A picture fell off the wall in the hallway with a crash of breaking glass. It felt like a car had hit the house. It was circling, pacing the perimeter, testing the walls. My heart felt like it was going to explode. I shifted my position, aiming the shotgun in the direction of the sound. What was I going to do? Shoot through the wall? What if it came through a window instead? I was trapped. I was in a flimsy wooden box, and a monster was trying to get in. The footfalls started. Heavy, deliberate steps on the damp earth outside. Thump, thump, thump. It walked around the side of the house. I could track its progress by the sounds. I heard it brush against the siding, a rough, rasping sound. I heard its claws click on the concrete foundation of the porch. It went on for the rest of the night. It never tried to smash the door down. It never broke a window. It just patrolled. It would circle the house, then sit in the darkness for an hour, silent. Then the circling would start again. The scratching would come back. Sometimes at the front door, sometimes at a window. It was a psychological war. It was letting me know it was still there, that it was patient, that it wasn't going anywhere. I spent the entire night on the floor of my living room, wide awake, clutching that shotgun like it was a holy relic. I never moved. I just listened to the sounds of the monster that was camped outside my door. I watched the black squares of the windows waiting for a shape to blot them out. As the first hint of gray light started to creep into the sky, the sound stopped. Just like that. The pacing ceased. The scratching was gone. I waited. I didn't trust the silence. I stayed there, cramped and terrified, for another hour, then another, until the sun was fully up and streaming through the cracks in the blinds. Only then did I dare to move. My body was stiff and sore. I crept to the kitchen window, the one over the sink that looked out onto the back porch. My hands were trembling as I slowly, carefully lifted the edge of the blind. The yard was empty. The porch was empty. The sun was shining. The birds were singing. It was just a normal morning. If it weren't for the evidence, I might have convinced myself I had dreamed it all. A vivid, terrifying nightmare brought on by stress and exhaustion. But the evidence was there. I unlocked the back door, the shotgun still in my hands, and stepped out onto the porch. The air was cool and clean. The foul smell was gone. I looked at the door. There were 3 long, deep gouges running diagonally across the solid oak. They started about waist high and ended near the bottom. The wood was splintered and shredded, as if someone had taken a small axe to it. The gouges were perfectly parallel. Whatever had made them was immensely strong. I stepped off the porch into the yard. The ground around the house was a mess. The damp earth was churned up, and in the mud there were tracks. They were huge. The clearest ones were canine in shape, like a massive wolf's print. But they were almost twice the size of any wolf track I had ever seen. The stride between them was enormous. But there were other prints, too. Elongated, almost human-like footprints with a clear heel and toe impressions. But the toes were too long and ended in deep claw marks. It looked like it had been switching between walking on 2 legs and 4. I followed the tracks around the house. I saw where it had slammed into the wall. There was a dent in the siding and a smear of dark, greasy fur caught on a nail head. I stood in my yard, in the bright morning sun, and a cold dread washed over me that had nothing to do with the night before. It was the dread of understanding, the dread of knowing that my world had fundamentally and permanently changed. The first thing I did was call my dad. He lived about 30 minutes away in town. I needed to tell someone. I needed someone to tell me I wasn't crazy. My voice was shaking on the phone. I tried to explain what had happened, what I had seen, the silence, the smell, the creature by the oak tree, the chase, the siege on the house. It all sounded insane. Even as I was saying the words, I could hear how they sounded. Like something from a cheap horror movie, not something that happens in the real world. My dad listened patiently. When I was done, there was a long pause. "Son," he said, his voice calm and reasonable. "You were tired. It was getting dark. You probably saw a bear." "Dad, it wasn't a bear," I said, my voice rising with frustration. "It had a dog's head. It stood on 2 legs. It chased me to the house." "A bear will stand up," he said, "and a big one can move fast. You were scared. Your mind filled in the blanks." He came over an hour later. I showed him the scratches on the door. "Big coyote," he said, "or a feral dog with long claws." I showed him the tracks. "Could be anything," he said. "The mud is soft. It distorts things." He was trying to protect me. He was trying to put my world back together for me. to give me a rational explanation that would allow me to feel safe again. But all it did was make me feel completely and utterly alone. He didn't believe me. He looked at me with concern in his eyes like I was losing my mind. That was the beginning of the real aftermath. The fear didn't end when the sun came up. It was just getting started. I couldn't stay in the house alone that next night. I went to my dad's. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing orange embers in the dark. I heard that roar. I felt the vibration of its footsteps in the ground. I went back to the property the next day, but something was broken. The place didn't feel like home anymore. It felt alien, threatening. The woods I had loved my whole life now looked like a wall of darkness, a place where monsters hid. The familiar comfort was gone, replaced by a constant, gnawing fear. I became a prisoner in my own home. I stopped going outside after dusk. I bought more floodlights, powerful ones that lit up the entire yard like a baseball stadium. I installed new deadbolts on the doors and bars on the windows. I slept with the shotgun leaning against my nightstand. I became hyper-vigilant. Every sound at night was it coming back. The wind in the trees, a raccoon on the roof, the house groaning as it settled. Each sound sent a jolt of ice-cold adrenaline through my veins. I would lie in bed for hours, wide awake, just listening. The feeling of being watched never went away. Sometimes I would be working in the shop during the day, bright sunshine all around me, and I would get that same feeling, that prickling on the back of my neck. I would look up at the tree line, half expecting to see it standing there watching me. My life became a shell of what it had been. I stopped talking to my dad about it. It just created a wall between us. He wanted to help, but he couldn't. How do you help someone with a problem you don't believe exists? I tried to go on as normal. I worked in the shop. I went to town for supplies. But I was just going through the motions. The joy was gone. The peace was gone. That property, the place I'd always considered my sanctuary, had become my prison. I lasted 6 more months. 6 months of sleepless nights, of jumping at shadows, of living with a knot of fear permanently tied in my stomach. The final straw came one afternoon in late winter. There was a light dusting of snow on the ground. I was walking from the house to the shop and I saw them. A line of tracks coming out of the woods, leading right up to the edge of the clearing. They stopped just outside the reach of the floodlights. They were the same tracks, the massive canine prints. It had come back. It had stood there in the dark, just watching the house. Then the tracks led back into the woods. It was still here. It was still watching me. I went inside, packed a bag, and left. I drove to my dad's house and told him I couldn't live there anymore. I didn't try to explain why again. I just said I needed a change. He knew, of course. He just nodded sadly. I sold the property a few months later. I took a loss on it, but I didn't care. I just wanted it out of my life. I never set foot on that land again. It's been years now. I live in a small city. I have a normal job. I have a life. But I'm not the same person. The man who walked into those woods on that summer evening never came back out. I don't go camping or hiking anymore. I don't like to be in the woods, especially at night. When I'm at a friend's house, in the country, I feel a familiar anxiety creep in as the sun goes down. I always make sure the curtains are closed. I know what I saw. I'm not trying to convince anyone. I know how it sounds. But I was there. I saw a creature that shouldn't exist, a thing of nightmare and legend. It was intelligent, it was malicious, and it was real. A bear doesn't have a wolf's head and stand 8 feet tall. A bear doesn't have backward bending legs. A bear doesn't stalk you to your home and spend the entire night trying to terrorize you into coming out. I'm sharing this for one reason: to tell people that the world is not as neat and tidy as we like to think. There are still dark places on the map, deep woods where things from a much older, wilder time still roam. Be careful. Be aware. And if you're ever in the woods and everything suddenly goes silent, don't wait around to find out why. Turn around and run. Welcome back, everyone. I'm glad you could join me tonight. No matter where you are in the world, no matter what time it may be where you are, I truly hope that you are doing well. I hope you're feeling safe, and I hope you're feeling sound. For those of you who are new, what we do here is simple. I read stories. These stories are sent to me by people just like you. They are first-hand accounts of experiences that defy easy explanation. These are not campfire tales or works of fiction. They are memories that have been carried often in silence for years. The people who share them are not seeking fame or attention. They are seeking a place where their truth can be heard without judgment. We don't push conclusions here. We don't try to neatly categorize the unknown. We just listen. We honor the experience as it was lived. If you have had an encounter that has stayed with you, something that you feel needs to be shared, my email address is in the description below. I read every single submission that comes in, and I am always grateful for the trust that people place in me and in this community. So tonight we have 4 stories for you. 4 experiences from deep in the woods and on the lonely roads where the world feels a little thinner, where the line between the known and the unknown can blur in an instant. So find a comfortable spot, turn down the lights, lock your doors, and check your windows. Settle in, and let's begin. My name is Frank, and I'm 56 years old. I'm writing this down because my wife says I need to get it out, but I can't talk about it. Not out loud. Every time I try, the words get stuck in my throat. So I'm writing it. Maybe sending it to you will help. Maybe it won't. But I have to do something. This happened 12 years ago, but it feels like it was this morning. The memory doesn't fade. It's branded on me. I've been a hunter my entire life. My father taught me how to track, how to read the woods, how to be quiet and respectful. We had 80 acres of land in northern Michigan, mostly dense hardwood forest with a few small clearings and a creek running through the back 40. It was my sanctuary. It was the one place on earth where I felt completely at home, completely in control. I knew every tree, every game trail, every dip and rise in the terrain. There were no surprises on that land. Or so I thought. The stand I was in that day was one I'd built with my dad when I was a teenager. It was a sturdy 2-man ladder stand, tucked into a cluster of old oaks, overlooking a natural funnel where deer trails converged. I'd harvested more deer from that stand than I could count. It was a reliable spot, a safe spot. The day started like any other November morning during rifle season, cold, crisp, with a thin layer of frost covering everything. The air was so still you could hear a leaf fall 100 yards away. I got into the stand well before sunrise, settled in, and just listened to the woods wake up. That's my favorite part. The slow transition from the silence of the night to the first calls of the birds, the rustling of squirrels, the distant snap of a twig that could be a deer. It's a symphony. But that morning, the symphony was cut short. Around 8 o'clock, after the sun was fully up and the morning activity should have been at its peak, everything just stopped. It wasn't a gradual tapering off. It was abrupt, like someone flipped a switch. The birds went silent. The squirrels vanished. The constant, subtle hum of the forest was gone. All that was left was a heavy, oppressive silence. I've experienced the woods going quiet before, usually when a predator like a coyote or a bobcat is moving through. But that kind of silence is tense, expectant. This was different. This was a dead silence, a hollow, empty feeling that made the hair on my arms stand up. I scanned the woods, my rifle resting on the rail of the stand, my eyes tracing the familiar lines of the trees. Nothing, no movement, no sound. I told myself it was just a fluke. Maybe a hawk flew over. Something spooked the woods. It would pass. But it didn't. The silence stretched on for minutes. 10 minutes, 20. Then came the smell. It wasn't strong at first, just a faint whiff on the breeze. It was foul. I've smelled dead animals before. I've smelled gut piles left by other hunters. This was not that. This was a combination of things I couldn't place. It was like wet, matted fur mixed with something like rotting meat. But there was an undertone to it that was almost chemical, like copper or old pennies. It was a thick, greasy smell that coated the inside of my nose and made me want to gag. My first rational thought was a bear. We have black bears on the property. I've seen them many times. A big old boar can smell pretty rank. So I looked for a bear. I expected to see a black shape lumbering through the underbrush. But there was nothing. The smell got stronger, then weaker, as if whatever was making it was moving around, circling. My unease was turning into real fear now. This was wrong. Everything about this morning was wrong. The silence, the smell, the feeling of being watched that was now crawling up my spine. I'm not a man who scares easily. I've been face to face with a cornered wild boar. I've had a bear bluff charge me. I know what fear in the woods feels like. This was a whole different category. This was primal. This was the kind of fear that tells you that you are no longer the predator. You are the prey. I stayed frozen, barely breathing, trying to pinpoint the source of the smell. And that's when I saw it. It wasn't a clear sighting at first. Just movement. About 70 yards out, in a thicket of young maples, a patch of darkness that detached itself from the other shadows. It was big. My mind immediately went back to bear. It had to be a bear. What else could be that big and that dark? It moved slowly, deliberately, weaving between the trees, but it wasn't moving like a bear. Bears are bulky. They roll when they walk. This thing was fluid. It moved with a strange grace that didn't fit its size, and it was tall. Even hunched over, it looked too tall. I raised my rifle, the scope automatically coming to my eye. I centered the crosshairs on the dark shape, trying to get a better look. It stepped into a small patch of sunlight, filtering through the canopy. and my world fell apart. It stood up. It just rose up on two legs effortlessly, like a man getting out of a chair. But it wasn't a man. It was 7, maybe 8 feet tall. Its shoulders were impossibly broad, 3 or 4 feet across, packed with muscle that was visible even under a coat of shaggy dark gray fur. Its arms were long, too long. They hung down past its knees, ending in what looked like large dark hands with thick fingers. But the head is what broke my brain. It was the head of a wolf or a German shepherd. A long snout, a heavy brow, and pointed ears that were perched right on top of its skull. The ears swiveled independently of each other, scanning the silent woods. I was looking at it through a 12-power scope. I saw every detail. The way the fur was matted in places, the glint of morning light off its wet nose, the sheer power in its neck and shoulders. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My mind was just screaming one word over and over again. Impossible. 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 This thing did not exist. It could not exist. And yet, there it was, standing in a patch of sun on my family's land, 70 yards from my tree stand. It took a step forward and I saw its legs. They were not like a man's legs. They were digitigrade, bent backward like a dog's with a powerful hock joint. It walked on the balls of its feet, the long, dark feet pressing into the frosted leaves without a sound. I lowered the rifle, my arms shaking so badly I could barely hold it. What was I going to do? Shoot it? The thought was absurd. That was a .30-06 in my hands, a powerful rifle. But looking at the sheer bulk of that thing, I had a sudden, terrifying certainty that shooting it would be the worst mistake of my life. All it would do was make it angry. As if it heard my thoughts, its head snapped in my direction. It didn't look at the tree I was in. It looked right at me, right into my eyes. I saw its eyes then. They weren't red, like in the stories you hear. They were a pale, sickly yellow. And they were intelligent. That was the most terrifying part of all. It wasn't just an animal looking in my direction. It was looking at me. It knew I was there. It knew I was watching it. And I felt a wave of pure malevolence wash over me from it. It wasn't just a predator looking at a potential meal. It was hatred. Pure, undiluted hatred. We were locked like that for what felt like an eternity. Me, frozen in my stand, and this impossible creature staring up at me with those cold yellow eyes. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I was sure it could hear it. My life, up to that point, had been built on a foundation of logic and reason. The world made sense. Animals were animals. People were people. In that moment, that foundation crumbled into dust. The creature broke the stare first. It lowered its head slightly, and a low sound rumbled in its chest. It wasn't a growl. It was deeper, more resonant. I felt it in the floor of the stand, a vibration that came up through the tree itself. Then it started to move. It didn't run. It didn't charge. It began to walk, slowly, deliberately, in a wide circle around the base of my tree. Its eyes never left me. Its head was turned, tracking my position as it moved. This was not animal behavior. A bear would have either charged the tree or run away. A wolf would have been long gone. This was an act of intimidation. It was showing me that it knew where I was. It was showing me that I was trapped. It was showing me that it was in control. The smell was overwhelming now. I had to put my hand over my nose and mouth to keep from vomiting. It circled the tree once, twice, 3 times. With every step, my terror grew. I was 20 feet up a tree with a high-powered rifle, and I'd never felt so helpless in my entire life. It stopped directly beneath me. I couldn't see it anymore. I could only hear it. I heard the soft padding of its feet on the leaves. I heard its breathing, a deep, wet, raspy sound. Then I heard a new sound, sniffing. Loud, deliberate sniffs, right at the base of my ladder. It was smelling me. It was taking in my scent, learning me. My mind was gone. I was pure animal panic. I was convinced it was going to come up the ladder. I pictured that wolf-like head appearing over the edge of the platform, those yellow eyes inches from mine. I raised my rifle and pointed it straight down, my finger trembling on the trigger. I waited. Silence. The sniffing stopped. The breathing stopped. It was just gone, but I knew it wasn't. It was still there, playing with me. I stayed like that, aiming at the empty space below me for I don't know how long. Minutes bled into an hour, the sun climbed higher in the sky, and I did not move. Finally, I heard a sound off to my right, a single heavy footstep, then another. It was moving away. I risked a glance over the side of the stand. I saw it walking back the way it had come, without a backward glance. It moved into the thicket of maples and simply vanished. One moment it was there, the next it was gone. The smell lingered for a few more minutes, and then it too was gone. And then, slowly, tentatively, the sounds of the forest returned. A single bird chirped. A squirrel chattered somewhere in the distance. The symphony started up again. The switch had been flipped back on. But I didn't move. I stayed in that stand until well after noon, until the sun was directly overhead. I was too terrified to go down. I was convinced it was a trick, that it was waiting for me, hiding somewhere in the trees. Eventually, the need to get out of there, to get back to the safety of my truck, overrode the fear of what might be waiting. Climbing down that ladder was the hardest thing I've ever done. Every rung was an act of will. My legs were jelly. My hands were slick with sweat. When my feet touched the ground, I ran. I didn't walk. I didn't jog. I ran like my life depended on it because I believed it did. I didn't look back. I just ran, crashing through the brush, not caring about the noise, my rifle held tight in my hand. The half-mile back to my truck felt like a marathon. When I saw it, parked in the small clearing where I always left it, I almost cried with relief. I fumbled with the keys, threw the door open and dove inside, slamming and locking it behind me. I sat there for a long time, hyperventilating, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. I didn't start the engine right away. I just sat there, scanning the tree line, expecting to see those yellow eyes staring back at me. But there was nothing, just the woods. The same woods I had known and loved my entire life. But they were different now. They were tainted. The sanctuary had been violated. I eventually drove home, breaking every speed limit. When I walked in the door, my wife took one look at my face and knew something was terribly wrong. I was pale, shaking, my eyes wide. "What happened?" she asked. "Did you fall?" I tried to tell her. I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. I just shook my head and mumbled something about seeing a big bear and getting spooked. She didn't believe me, but she didn't press it. She just helped me out of my gear and made me sit down. I sold my rifle the next week. I haven't been hunting since. I haven't set foot on that 80 acres. My brother uses the land now. He says I'm crazy for giving up hunting. He asks me what happened that day. I can't tell him. How do you tell someone that a monster from a nightmare is real? How do you explain that the world isn't the safe, logical place we all pretend it is? They would think I was crazy. They would think I was lying. So I keep it inside. But it eats at me. I don't sleep well anymore. Any strange noise outside at night sends a jolt of that same icy fear through me. We have motion-activated floodlights all around our house now. My wife thinks it's for security, and it is. But I'm not worried about human intruders. I know what I saw that day. I'm not trying to convince anyone. I don't care if people believe me or not. This wasn't a bear. I've seen dozens of bears. A bear does not have a canine head. A bear does not walk on two legs like a man. A bear does not look at you with intelligent, hateful eyes. I don't know what it was, but it's out there. And the feeling I got from it, the sheer malice, is something I will take to my grave. The woods are not my sanctuary anymore. They are just a place where the shadows are deep, and sometimes the shadows stand up and look back at you. Name withheld. The story you are about to hear comes from a young woman who was driving home late one night. It serves as a stark reminder that you don't always have to be deep in the wilderness to have an encounter. Sometimes the edge of the woods is close enough. My name is withheld for privacy. I was 19 when this happened. It was about 5 years ago, during my first year of college. I was attending a community college about an hour away from my parents' house, where I still lived. To save money on gas, I had a lot of my classes scheduled on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So I would drive to campus in the morning and stay until my last class ended at 9 in the evening. The drive home was always late. Most of it was on the highway, but the last 20 minutes was on a stretch of 2-lane county road that cut through a large state forest. It was the kind of road that every rural kid knows. Poorly lit, winding, and lined with dense, dark trees that seemed to crowd right up to the pavement. There were no houses, no street lights, nothing but asphalt, woods, and whatever was in them. I'd driven that road thousands of times in my life, at all hours of the day and night. It was second nature. I never felt scared on it. Annoyed by slow drivers, maybe. Wary of deer, always. But never scared. That night was a typical Thursday. I was tired from a long day of classes. I remember I had a big history exam the next day that I was stressed about. I was just on autopilot, listening to music on the radio, my mind going over dates and names I needed to remember. It was probably around 10 o'clock when I turned off the main highway onto the county road. The transition is always a little jarring. You go from the bright lights of the highway with other cars around you to instant darkness and isolation. But it was normal. It was home. I was about halfway down the road, maybe 10 minutes from my house, when the first odd thing happened. My radio, which had been playing a clear signal from a popular station, suddenly dissolved into static. Not the fading in and out kind of static you get when you're losing a signal. This was an abrupt, harsh burst of white noise, like the station had just been wiped off the air. I fiddled with the dial, tried to find another station, but there was nothing, just static across the entire band. I thought it was strange, but I figured it was just a weird, atmospheric thing. I turned the radio off, and the car was suddenly very, very quiet, just the hum of the engine and the sound of the tires on the pavement. It was in that silence that the feeling started. It began as a subtle prickle on the back of my neck, the feeling of being watched. I know it sounds like a cliche, but that's exactly what it was. It was an intense, focused pressure, like a pair of eyes were boring into me from the darkness outside my car. I glanced at my rear view mirror. Nothing but this black road behind me. I looked at the woods on my right, then on my left. Just a wall of impenetrable darkness. I told myself I was being stupid. I was tired. I was stressed about my exam. My imagination was just running away with me. But the feeling didn't go away. It got stronger. It was so intense that I felt like I had to physically push it away. My heart started beating faster. My hands gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. I pressed down on the accelerator, wanting to get home, to get into the light. I was probably going about 60 in a 45 zone, taking the curves faster than I should have been, and that's when my headlights hit it. It was standing in the middle of my lane, about 100 feet ahead. My first thought was deer. My foot instinctively went for the brake. But in the split second it took for my brain to process the image, I knew it wasn't a deer. It was standing on two legs. It was tall and black against the white glare of my headlights. It was broad and thick, not slender like a person. I slammed on the brakes. The tires screeched on the pavement and my car swerved slightly before coming to a stop maybe 40 feet from the thing. My seatbelt locked, jamming into my shoulder. Everything was dead silent except for the idling engine and the sound of my own ragged breathing, and I just stared. I couldn't look away. The creature was caught perfectly in my high beams. It was covered in dark, coarse-looking hair. It stood at least 7 feet tall, with massive shoulders and a powerful chest that tapered down to a narrow waist. Its arms were long and heavily muscled, hanging at its sides. Its legs were the strangest part. They were bent like a dog's, with the knees high and the ankles backward. It was standing on its toes, balanced and ready, but its head was what truly terrified me. It was a perfect canine head, a long, tapered snout filled with teeth that I could see even from that distance, tall, pointed ears that stood erect on its head, and its eyes. They glowed, a bright, hellish amber color, reflecting my headlights like a cat's, but so much bigger, so much more intense. It didn't move. It just stood there in the middle of the road as if it had been waiting for me. My mind just shut down. I was trying to make sense of what I was seeing, trying to fit it into some logical box. Is it a man in a costume? No, it can't be. The proportions are all wrong. The legs. No human can bend their legs like that. Is it a bear? No, bears don't have long snouts and pointed ears. They don't stand so perfectly balanced on two legs. It was nothing I had ever seen or could have ever imagined, and it was real. It was 40 feet from my windshield. Then it turned its head slightly. The movement was slow, deliberate, and utterly chilling. It looked directly at me inside the car. I felt its gaze like a physical blow. It wasn't just looking at the car, it was looking at me. It saw me. And in that moment, the feeling of being watched intensified 1,000 times over. It was a feeling of being assessed, of being judged. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my soul that this thing meant me harm. It took a step, one slow, deliberate step towards my car. That's what broke the spell. The paralysis that had gripped me shattered, and raw animal panic took its place. I didn't think. I just reacted. I wrenched the steering wheel to the left, stomped on the accelerator, and swerved into the oncoming lane to get around it. For a terrifying second, I thought it was going to lunge at the car. I had a flash of imagery in my head of it smashing through my driver's side window, of those claws and teeth. But it didn't. As I passed it, I couldn't help but look. It was still standing there, but it had turned its whole body to follow my car's movement. Its head was swiveled. Those glowing amber eyes locked on me as I sped past. The image of it standing there, illuminated against the black woods, is burned into my memory forever. I didn't slow down. I kept the pedal to the floor, my eyes glued to the rear-view mirror. I could see it, a tall, dark shape, shrinking in the distance, still standing in the middle of the road. Then I took a sharp curve, and it was gone. I didn't stop looking in the mirror. I kept expecting to see it again, to see it running behind me, easily keeping pace with my car. My imagination was running wild with the most horrible possibilities. The 10-minute drive from that spot to my house was the longest of my life. Every shadow on the side of the road was it. Every rustle of leaves was it. When I finally saw the lights of my house through the trees, I started sobbing. It was a raw, hysterical kind of crying that I couldn't control. I pulled into the driveway, not even bothering to put the car in the garage. I just killed the engine, fumbled with the door, and sprinted for the front porch. I burst through the door, slamming it shut behind me, fumbling with the deadbolt until it clicked into place. My parents were in the living room watching television. They jumped up, startled by my violent entrance. My mom rushed over to me. "Honey, what's wrong? What happened?" I was a mess. Crying, shaking, unable to form a coherent sentence. I tried to tell them what I saw. Between sobs, I managed to get out words like road, creature, wolf head, standing. My dad, ever the practical one, immediately assumed I'd been in an accident or had a near miss with a deer. He went outside with a flashlight to check my car for damage. He came back in a few minutes later and said the car was fine. "You probably just saw a big deer and it spooked you," he said, trying to be reassuring. "You were tired from a long day." "No," I insisted. "It wasn't a deer. It was standing on two legs. It looked like a wolf. But it was huge, like a man." My mom put her arm around me. "It was probably just a trick of the light, sweetie. Headlights can play funny tricks on you in the dark." They weren't listening. They weren't hearing me. They had already decided what had happened. I was a tired, stressed out college kid whose imagination had gotten the better of her. I tried to argue, to make them understand. But it was no use. The more I insisted, the more they looked at me with that gentle, concerned pity that's worse than outright disbelief. I finally just gave up. I let my mom lead me upstairs to my room. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my bed with the light on, staring at my window, convinced that I would see those glowing amber eyes looking back at me from the darkness. The next day I was exhausted. I failed my history exam. I couldn't concentrate on anything. The image of the creature was all I could see. Life went on. I never talked about it with my parents again. It was our silent, unspoken agreement. But something inside me had fundamentally changed. My sense of safety was gone. The world was no longer a predictable place. I started taking the long way home from school, adding almost 30 minutes to my drive just to avoid that stretch of county road. I still do, to this day. I can't drive on rural roads at night anymore without my heart pounding in my chest. I'm constantly scanning the tree line, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The fear is always there, lurking just beneath the surface. I know what I saw. It wasn't a deer, it wasn't a bear, it wasn't a trick of the light, it was real, and it was intelligent. The way it looked at me, the way it moved with such deliberate purpose. That wasn't an animal, it was something else. Something ancient and malevolent that lives in the dark places of the world. I don't know why it was standing in the road that night. I don't know if it was waiting for me or for anyone. And I don't want to know. All I know is that for about 30 seconds, I was in its world. And that is more than enough for one lifetime. I'm sharing this because I know I'm not the only one. I've read other stories since then, stories from people who have seen the same thing. It helps a little to know I'm not crazy, but it doesn't take away the fear. It doesn't erase the memory of those glowing eyes. Nothing ever will. The following account was sent in by a man detailing an experience he shared with his cousin. It's a powerful story, not just because of the encounter itself, but because of what happened afterward. It shows how a single terrifying event can sever even the strongest of bonds. My name is David. I'm 34 now, but this happened when I was 22. It's about an annual fishing trip my cousin Matt and I used to take. Used to. We don't talk anymore, not since that trip. Matt and I grew up together. We were more like brothers than cousins. We did everything together, and our favorite thing to do was get outdoors. We both loved fishing, especially fly fishing for trout in the remote rivers of the Huron-Manistee National Forests. Every fall, we'd pick a weekend, pack up his old pickup truck, and drive north for a couple of days of nothing but fishing, campfires, and bad jokes. It was our tradition. It was sacred. The spot we went to that year was a new one for us. We'd heard about a stretch of river from an old-timer at a bait shop that was supposedly full of big brown trout and hardly ever saw any people. It was deep in the forest, accessible only by a series of unmarked dirt roads, and then a half-mile hike in. It was perfect. We found the spot without too much trouble. It was just as described. A beautiful wide bend in the river with deep pools and riffles. The woods were thick and old with huge pines and oaks that blocked out most of the direct sunlight. It felt truly wild. Untouched. We spent the afternoon fishing, and the old-timer was right. We were catching beautiful fish one after another. We were having the time of our lives, laughing and carrying on. Just two guys enjoying the wilderness. As dusk started to settle, we decided to pack it in for the day and set up our camp. We had a small clearing right on the riverbank where we pitched our two-man tent and started gathering firewood. The sun was going down, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The air was getting cool. It was that perfect time of day in the woods when everything is peaceful and quiet. That's when we heard the first sound. It was a loud, sharp crack that echoed through the trees from the other side of the river. It sounded like someone hitting a thick tree with a baseball bat. "What was that?" Matt asked, looking up from the fire he was building. Probably a dead branch falling, I said, not giving it much thought. We call them widowmakers for a reason. But it didn't sound like a falling branch. There was no crash of smaller branches or rustle of leaves afterward, just the single loud crack and then silence. We both shrugged it off and went back to what we were doing. A few minutes later it happened again. Crack. Same sound, same spot across the river. This time we both stopped and stared into the darkening woods on the other side. That's no branch, Matt said, his voice a little lower now. Someone else must be out here. That seemed like the most logical explanation, even though we hadn't seen another soul all day. Maybe another fisherman or a hunter. I yelled out, "Hello? Anyone over there?" My voice echoed and then faded. No answer. Just the sound of the river and the chirping of crickets. We stood there for a minute, listening. Nothing. A weird feeling was starting to creep over me. The peaceful vibe of the evening was gone, replaced by a low-level anxiety. We were supposed to be alone out here. That was the whole point. Then Matt, who has a better sense of smell than anyone I know, lifted his head and sniffed the air. "Do you smell that?" he asked. I took a deep breath, and I smelled it too. It was awful. It was a mix of a whole bunch of foul odors rolled into one. There was a heavy, musky smell like a wet dog that hasn't been washed in years. Underneath that was the unmistakable stench of decay, like roadkill, that's been sitting in the sun for a week. And there was something else, a sharp, metallic tang, like old blood. The smell was thick and nauseating. It came and went on the breeze, but it was definitely coming from across the river. "Good Lord, what is that?" I whispered, covering my nose with my shirt sleeve. "Maybe a dead deer washed up on the bank," Matt suggested, but he didn't sound convinced. His eyes were wide, and he kept scanning the opposite bank, which was now mostly lost in deep shadow. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming now. We both felt it. It was a palpable, hostile presence that was focused entirely on us. The woods had gone completely silent again. No crickets, no frogs, nothing. Just us, the river, and that horrible smell. "Grab the big flashlight," Matt said, his voice barely a whisper. I fumbled in my pack and pulled out our big mag light, the heavy-duty 4-cell one. I switched it on, and its powerful beam cut through the darkness. I handed it to Matt. He played the beam slowly across the opposite riverbank, from left to right. The light illuminated the trees, the rocks, the water's edge. Nothing. He was about to turn the light off when he stopped. "Wait," he breathed. He centered the beam on a spot deep in the shadows between two massive pine trees, and that's when we saw them. 2 points of light, reflecting the beam back at us. Eye shine. But this wasn't the green or white eye shine of a deer or a raccoon. This was a deep, burning red. They were set wide apart, and they were high off the ground. Way too high for any normal animal. My blood ran cold. "What is that?" I stammered. "A deer?" "That's no deer, man," Matt said, his voice tight with fear. "It's too high, and deer eyes are not red." As he said it, the thing stepped out from behind the trees and into the full beam of the flashlight, and our world ended. It was a monster. There is no other word for it. It was standing on 2 legs, and it was huge. Easily 8 feet tall, probably more. Its body was a mass of thick, dark muscle, covered in shaggy blackish-brown fur. Its shoulders were immense, and its arms were long and powerful, ending in huge clawed hands. Its legs were bent like a wolf's, and it stood poised on the balls of its large, dark feet. Its head was that of a giant canine, a long graying snout, a heavy brow, and tall pointed ears that twitched as they tracked the sound of the river. Its mouth was slightly open, and we could see a row of yellow, sharp teeth. And its eyes, those two burning red coals, were fixed right on us. We were both completely frozen, paralyzed by a mixture of sheer terror and utter disbelief. This thing was impossible. It was a creature from folklore, from nightmares, and it was standing 50 yards away, on the other side of a river. The river suddenly felt very, very small. The creature lifted its head and a sound came out of it that I will never forget as long as I live. It wasn't a howl or a growl or a roar. It was a deep, guttural, vibrating sound that seemed to come from the very depths of the earth. It was a sound of pure dominance and rage. It hit us like a physical force, and I could feel the vibration in my teeth and bones. Then it took a step. It stepped off the bank and into the shallow water at the river's edge. It was coming for us. That was it. The spell was broken. We didn't say a word to each other. We didn't need to. Our minds were perfectly in sync, driven by the most basic survival instinct. Run. We dropped everything. Fishing rods, tackle boxes, the cooler full of food and beer, our camping chairs. Matt dropped the flashlight, plunging us back into near darkness. We just turned and ran. We sprinted away from the river, away from our camp, crashing blindly through the underbrush in the direction of the truck. I could hear it behind us. I could hear the massive splashes as it crossed the river. I could hear heavy, thudding footsteps on the bank, closing the distance. I didn't dare look back. I just pumped my legs as hard as I could, branches whipping at my face, my lungs on fire. Matt was right beside me. I could hear his panicked breathing. That half-mile hike back to the truck was the most terrifying experience of my life. Every second I expected to feel a clawed hand clamp down on my shoulder. I expected to hear that guttural roar right behind me. When we finally burst out of the trees and saw the familiar shape of Matt's old Ford, it was like seeing an angel. He was fumbling with his keys, his hands shaking violently. "Come on, come on, come on," I was yelling. He finally got the door open. We both piled into the cab, slamming and locking the doors. Matt jammed the key into the ignition and cranked the engine. It sputtered once, twice, and then roared to life. He threw it in reverse, backed up in a spray of gravel, and then slammed it into drive. He floored it. We fishtailed down that narrow dirt road, bouncing and sliding, going way too fast. Neither of us looked back. We didn't speak a word until we hit the paved county road 10 minutes later. Matt pulled over and we both just sat there, gasping for air, shaking uncontrollably. Finally, I looked at him. What was that?" I managed to say. He was just staring straight ahead, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He shook his head. "I don't know, man," he said, his voice hoarse. "I don't know. We left everything behind, hundreds of dollars worth of fishing and camping gear. We never went back for it. We just drove. We drove all the way home that night, a 4-hour drive, in almost complete silence. The next day I called him. I needed to talk about it. I needed to process what we had seen. I needed to know I wasn't crazy. "Matt," I said, "we have to talk about last night." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "There's nothing to talk about," he said, his voice flat and cold. "What are you talking about? We saw that thing." "We saw a bear, Dave," he said, cutting me off. "It was dark. We saw a big bear and we got spooked. That's all." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "A bear? Matt, that was not a bear. You saw it. You saw its head, its legs. You heard it." "I'm telling you, it was a bear," he said again, his voice harder this time. We were tired. It was dark. Our minds played tricks on us. "Now drop it. I don't want to talk about it ever again." And he hung up. That was the beginning of the end for us. I tried to talk to him about it a few more times over the next few weeks, but he would just shut down. He refused to acknowledge what we both knew we had seen. He chose to rewrite the memory, to file it away as something mundane and explainable, a big bear. I think for him, the alternative was just too terrifying to accept. If that thing was real, then the world was not the place he thought it was, and he couldn't live with that. I couldn't live with the lie. Our friendship, that lifelong brotherhood, couldn't survive it. The shared trauma that should have brought us closer together ended up driving a wedge between us that we could never remove. We drifted apart. We stopped calling. The annual fishing trip never happened again. I see him sometimes at family gatherings. We're polite. We ask about each other's jobs, our families. But the connection is gone. There's always that night hanging in the air between us. The night we ran for our lives from an impossible monster. The night he chose to forget. I can't forget. I see it in my dreams. The red eyes. The long snout. The sheer size of it. I know what we saw. It wasn't a bear. And the scariest part is not the creature itself. It's the knowledge that something so terrifying can not only break your mind, but it can also break the bonds between people, leaving you utterly and completely alone with the truth. He left me alone with it, and I'll never forgive him for that. Our final story tonight is a chilling testament to the idea that home is not always the safe haven we believe it to be. It comes from a woman who found that the wilderness she loved and lived in held a terrifying secret, one that came right to her back door. My name will not be used. I am a 71-year-old woman, and for most of my adult life, I lived in a small cabin on 20 acres of land in the northern part of Michigan's Lower Peninsula. I was a widow. My husband, John, passed away 10 years before this incident. After he was gone, everyone expected me to sell the place and move into town. But I couldn't. That cabin was our dream. We built it together with our own hands. Every log, every stone in the fireplace held a memory. I felt safe there. The isolation didn't bother me. I welcomed it. My nearest neighbor was 2 miles down a dirt road. My only constant companion was my golden retriever, Buddy. My evenings had a comfortable routine. After dinner, Buddy and I would sit out on the screened-in back porch. I would read a book and he would lie at my feet, dozing. I loved listening to the sounds of the night. The owls, the coyotes yipping in the distance, the wind in the pines. It was my peace. The night this happened was in late October. The leaves had all fallen, and the air had the sharp bite of coming winter. I was on the porch, wrapped in a thick blanket, reading by the light of a single lamp. Buddy was at my feet, snoring softly. It was a perfectly normal, peaceful night. The first sign that something was wrong came from Buddy. He suddenly woke from a dead sleep. his head snapping up. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound I had rarely ever heard from him. He got to his feet, his body tense, and stared out into the darkness beyond, the porch light's glow. The fur on his back was standing straight up. "What is it, boy?" I whispered, putting my book down. "Is there a raccoon out there?" He ignored me. His attention was completely fixed on something in the yard. He didn't bark. He just stood there growling, a deep, continuous, menacing sound. Then he backed away from the screen door, whimpering. He came over to my chair and tried to crawl underneath it, shaking. Now I was scared. Buddy was a brave dog. He would chase off bears and stand his ground against anything. I had never seen him this terrified. He was acting as if the devil himself was outside. I stood up and went to the screen door, peering out into the darkness. My porch light illuminates a small circle of the backyard, but beyond that is just blackness. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. The same way you can feel the pressure change before a storm. The air felt heavy, charged with a silent, watching menace. The normal night sounds had vanished. Complete silence. Then I heard it. Footsteps. They were heavy. Not the four-legged scuttling of a deer or a bear. This was a two-legged walk. A heavy, plodding bipedal gait. Thump, 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 coming from the darkness at the edge of the woods. And they were coming closer. My heart leaped into my throat. My first thought was a person, a trespasser. But who would be walking around out here in the middle of the night? And the footsteps were too heavy, the stride too long. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. "This is private property." No answer. The footsteps just kept coming, slow and steady. I backed away from the door, my hand reaching for the handle of the heavy wooden door that led into the house. Buddy was whining, a high-pitched, terrified sound. A shape emerged from the darkness and moved into the edge of the porch light. It was just a silhouette at first, a towering column of black against the night. It was tall, impossibly tall. The roof of my porch is 9 feet high. This thing was nearly as tall as the roof. It was broad and massive, not shaped like a man. It took another step and another, and then it was standing just a few feet from the screen. It stopped there just outside the main glow of the light, still mostly in shadow. I could make out its form. Broad, powerful shoulders, long, thick arms, and a head that was not human. It was canine. I could see the silhouette of a long snout and tall, pointed ears. I was paralyzed. My mind refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. It was like a waking nightmare. The thing just stood there, watching me. I could feel its stare, even though I couldn't see its eyes clearly. I felt small and fragile, like a mouse being watched by an owl. After a long, terrifying moment, it moved again. It took one more slow step, bringing its head and torso into the full light. And I saw its face. It's a face that will haunt me until the day I die. The fur was dark and matted. The snout was long and gray, with black lips pulled back just enough to reveal the tips of huge yellow fangs. But the eyes were a pale, glowing yellow. They were filled with a cold, calculating intelligence and a deep, ancient hatred. It looked at me, and I knew it was not an animal. An animal is driven by instinct. This thing was driven by something else, something evil. It raised one of its long arms. Its hand was huge, with thick, dark fingers, tipped with what looked like heavy black claws. It reached out and placed its hand on the screen door. Not aggressively, just placed it there. Then it wrapped its fingers around the small metal handle, and it jiggled it, up and down, testing it. The small metallic click of the latch was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It knew what a door handle was. It knew how it worked. That single simple action was more terrifying than any roar or display of aggression could ever have been. That's when I finally found my voice. I screamed, a raw, piercing shriek of pure terror. I scrambled backward, stumbling over a rug, and fell to the floor of the porch. I crab-walked backward until I hit the main door of the house. My scream seemed to trigger it. Its calm, testing demeanor vanished. It let out a low, guttural snarl and yanked on the door handle. The cheap aluminum frame of the screen door bent and tore away from the wood with a screech of tearing metal. The door flew open and slammed against the side of the cabin, and the creature was standing there, in the open doorway of my porch. I scrambled to my feet, threw open the wooden door, and dove into the safety of my kitchen, Buddy right at my heels. I slammed the heavy oak door shut and fumbled with the deadbolt, my fingers numb and useless. I finally got it locked. No sooner had the bolt slid home than a tremendous boom echoed through the house as the creature slammed its body against the other side of the door. The whole wall shook. Dishes rattled in the cabinets. I screamed again and backed away, dragging the heavy kitchen table with me to try and barricade the door. Then came the scraping, long, deep scratches being gouged into the wood of my door. The sound of those claws on the oak was a sound from hell itself. I ran into my bedroom, locked that door too, and grabbed the old shotgun John had kept in the closet. I didn't even know if it was loaded. I just needed to hold something. I huddled in the corner of the room with Buddy whimpering and pressing against my legs, and I called 911 on my cell phone. I was hysterical. I don't remember what I said to the dispatcher. I think I was just screaming that something was trying to break into my house. She told me officers were on their way, but it would take at least 20 minutes. 20 minutes felt like a lifetime. The scraping at the back door stopped. For a few moments there was silence. Then I heard it at the front of the house. Thump, thump. Heavy footsteps on my front porch. Then scraping at the front door. It was circling the cabin, testing my defenses. I sat there in the dark, clutching the shotgun, listening to this monster trying to get in, and I prayed. I prayed like I had never prayed before. After what felt like an eternity, the sound stopped. I waited and waited. Finally, I heard the blessed sound of sirens in the distance, getting closer. When the police finally arrived, their flashing blue and red lights illuminating my dark cabin, I was still huddled in the corner, shaking. It took them a long time to coax me out. They found the back screen door torn completely off its hinges and thrown into the yard. They found long, deep gouges in both my front and back doors. The gouges were wide apart, in sets of 5, and splintered the thick oak. They wrote it up as a bear. A very large and determined bear, one of the young officers said, trying to be comforting. I didn't argue with them. What was the point? How could I explain that a bear doesn't know how to use a door handle? I didn't sleep in the cabin that night. I stayed with a friend in town. The next day I went back with a real estate agent. I put the cabin and the land up for sale. I took only my personal belongings and left everything else behind. I sold it for a loss. I didn't care. I just had to get away. I live in a small apartment in a town 50 miles away now. I'm on the 3rd floor. I have 3 locks on my door. I can't stand the quiet anymore. I need to hear the sounds of traffic, of other people. The sounds of the woods are no longer peaceful to me. They are a terrifying reminder of what's out there in the dark. I know what I saw. It was not a bear, it was a thinking, intelligent creature, filled with a malice that I cannot comprehend. And it wanted in my house. I don't know why it left. Maybe the sound of the coming sirens scared it off. Maybe it just got bored of its game. But I know that if it had tried for a few more minutes, my old wooden door would have given way. I don't like to think about what would have happened then. My peace is gone. My sanctuary was a lie. Sometimes the monsters are real, and sometimes they come knocking, and that's going to do it for this episode. A huge, genuine thank you to Frank and to the other individuals who trusted me with their experiences tonight. Sharing these memories takes a tremendous amount of courage, and I, along with everyone listening, am truly grateful. These stories remind us that the world is still a vast and mysterious place, that there are still shadows that hold secrets we are not meant to understand. Thank you to everyone who took the time to listen. Your time and attention are the most valuable things you can give, and it means the world to me that you choose to spend some of it here. If you enjoyed the episode, please consider hitting the like button. And if you know someone else who appreciates these kinds of stories, feel free to share it with them. If you haven't already, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. I always take the time to read through the comments. The respectful and insightful conversations that happen there are one of the best parts of this community. So please share your thoughts below. But as always, be kind and be respectful to the people who shared their stories and to each other. Until next time, my friends, watch over your loved ones, take care of each other, keep your head on a swivel, and as always, stay safe out there. Good night.